We are going to talk about it. Journalist Javed Rana is joining us from the Pakistani capital to discuss the latest developments from the D8 summit held in Egypt. Javed, thank you so much for joining us here on A News. Let's talk about the D8 summit because Turkish President Erdogan emphasized during the D8 summit in Cairo yesterday that stabilizing Syria is critical for the security and stability of the entire region. Considering Syria's ongoing challenges ranging from territorial fragmentation to the presence of the PKK terror group, what realistic steps can regional and international actors take?
I think to begin with, Syria badly needs security. And the biggest threat to the Syria right now is the apartheid state of Israel. As we speak, it has carried out more than 800 airstrikes in almost across Syria, and making it sure that all the military installations or important military bases, they all have been hit. And that is under the cover of that they are trying to basically destroy the chemical weapons, and they're trying to prevent these terrorist group, basically it is calling the HTS-led government as a terrorist group, to prevent them to get hold of these weapons and use against Israel. It doesn't understand this threat syndrome that Israel has generated over the period of time. It doesn't make sense. The government was not in place when it started out carrying out attacks against Syria. I think to begin with, this is the biggest problem for Syria. It is a continuing external aggression backed by the Americans. And another threat, which is internal, that is from within, and that is the YPG terrorist groups who have been carrying out terror attacks in Turkey over the last 4 decades. And I think right now, as we speak, the leaders from all these regional countries, time and again, they've been meeting, whether it is a D8 countries forum or other platform. These issues have been discussed over the period of the time. Now, the troubling part is that there is an external element which is very heavy, which has its clout onto the PKK terrorist groups, YPG terrorist groups. And I was hearing the US congressman, they were criticizing President Tayyip Erdogan that as to why he wants to dismantle them. He was questioning them. The point is that the terror group, which has killed 40,000 people over the period of the time during last 4 decades, why not Turkey would go after them? Why not Turkey would dismantle them? Now, the troubling part is there is a kind of a clash of interest. It's Israel, it is the Americans which are supporting these YPG terrorist group. And then they have their obviously political linkages, terror linkages inside Turkey. Now, under the garb of basically dismantling so-called Islamic State through these YPG terror group, I think my understanding is that USA will continue to support, Israel will continue to support in terms of sharing intelligence, in terms of supplying the weapons. That would remain the biggest challenge. Now, the critical question is, what is the way forward approach? Way forward approach is quite simple, that Syria has to be one country. It cannot be divided into parts. Something American want, something Israel wants, because Israel's policy has always been like the US to divide and rule. Now these groups like YPJ and other Kurdish terror groups and their political entities, those needs to be mainstreamed. Those need to be made part and parcel of not only of the interim government, but whenever the elections are held, which probably would held sometime next year, let them contest election. And if they get the majority, let them rule over Syria, which is obviously is not a possibility because they are not in a majority. So again, these terror groups have to be mainstreamed, because at the end of the day, everything has to be settled down on the negotiating table. But again, we have to see how, in what manner West is going to actually show its real teeth when it comes to Syria, because they have to protect every cost to the apartheid state of Israel. They are still pursuing a policy, they call it as a wait and see, on whether or not they are going to lift sanctions on Syria, on whether or not they're going to lift sanctions on the HTS leaders. These are still bigger questions. And basically, they want HTS-led interim government to compromise on their ideology, to compromise on this critical strategic interest of Syria. I think that is a bigger challenge for the HTS-led government. Let's see how things unfold. But certainly, back to the question that you raised, that at the end of the day, all these terror groups have to be mainstreamed, and that is how we can bring an end to this terror campaign.
Well, let's also talk about the importance of the summits like this, because what you explained is quite important, but let's take a look at from the perspective of the summit itself. During the times like this, summits that represents the region, summits that represents the other voices other than the international summits that we know that continues for years now. But like D8, there are different countries getting together to make a statement. How do you think that during the times like this, with the Syrian issue, with the Israeli issue, D8 being together and voicing what they think is important, and it is, if it is going to have any international impact, at least through diplomacy? What would you say about that?
Well, I think it has created optics that there is some kind of a consensus among the regional countries like Egypt, like Turkey, like Pakistan, and other regional countries, that they want a peaceful settlement of not only just Syria but also the territories in the occupied Palestine. But again, a bigger question is, frankly speaking, nobody is listening to the Muslim countries. It doesn't matter how many of them, how many times they have joined hands together. They have not been able to make their presence felt in the region to the Americans, to the West, to the Israel. And so far as similarly, because there are different platforms in the region, OIC is the biggest one. It has turned out to be a toothless body. And I think in a similar fashion, the other groups, other platforms which are there, it can create certain optics it can send message to the European Union, it can send message to the Americans. But at the end of the day, let's be realistic. We have to see the policy which is in place right now in the Middle East is basically to further strengthen Israel and actually further degrade Iran and Iran's proxy. That is a bigger policy which is in place now. Again, the challenge from the American perspective, challenge from European perspective is basically now the Turkey, because Turkey under President Tayyip Erdogan has turned out to be following a very independent foreign policy, and that is a part of the problem for the Americans. They want Turkey to compromise on YPG terror groups. They want Turkey to basically reduce its influence onto the HTS government. And at the same time, you will see that the kind of the help that right now Syria needs, that is not going to reach to them unless the regional countries come up in a big manner. Turkey has been doing it, playing its role, and in a similar fashion, Qatar is there. I think some other regional countries would also come forward. But the bigger question is the role of the European Union in terms of lifting sanctions on Syria, but also in terms of playing its role to improve the economy of Syria. I think that is still absent, and it is likely to stay absent because they don't want Syria to develop economically. They don't want Syria to develop militarily. That we have already seen with the terror attacks from the apartheid states.
And let's talk about the sidelines of the meetings as well, because they are also important during the meetings like this. The Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian pointed to ongoing regional crises, including attacks in Gaza, southern Lebanon, and Syria. How does Iran's role in supporting groups like Hezbollah and Hamas impact its ability to mediate in Syria? And in addition to that, what do you think about the meeting with the Turkish president?
I think Iran is deeply concerned right now, and understandably, because its proxies like Hezbollah, and that has been degraded. I would not call Hamas its proxy. Let's be clear-headed. Hamas is an indigenous political group. It is a military group. It is a genuine resistant group. Iran needed Hamas basically to show particularly to the Muslim world that it is supporting a Palestinian cause. But in case of Hezbollah, it has a very different dynamics. Hezbollah essentially has been a sectarian group. It had in the past, it has its footprint on Syria, which have been now, by and large, is being removed by the HTS-led government. There was a sectarian war in Syria. So Iran is basically losing its strength. It is losing it's a PR exercise on Palestinian cause, because the supply line, which started off from Iran to Iraq, from there to Syria, and from Syria to Lebanon, which ended up to Hezbollah, that supply line obviously has been affected, because President Bashar al-Assad, to whom Iran has been supporting over the years, he fought a sectarian battle. Tens of thousands of people were tortured, they were killed, millions were made homeless. And obviously, Iran is being seen in a very negative shade in Syria. So I don't expect that the new government in Damascus would allow that supply line to happen. And apart from that, I think Hezbollah has been degraded so much that now it is unlikely that Hezbollah would be in a position in months and years to come to carry out attacks against apartheid state the way it used to be.
Well, let's talk about a new inclusion to the D8 as well. The inclusion of Azerbaijan, I'm talking about, as a full member of the D8 reflects the organization's commitment to expanding its reach. How could this expansion impact the group's influence in the global economic and political affairs? Could this also signal a shift towards more assertive role for developing nations in international governance?
Well, I think to begin with, since Azerbaijan is a country which has a high income group, and its economy is largely based on the money it gets from the oil sector, from the gas sector, and its GDP has been at around between 50 to 80 billion US dollar. In growth rate is going down right now. Inflation rate is by and large is a well controlled. Overall indicators of Azerbaijan is that it is a country which is certainly a developing country. It has the bigger tools of the economy, gas and oil, which it has been exporting to the many countries in the region. And I think with Azerbaijan being included in D8 countries, certainly it will bring a positive change, and it will basically raise the stature of the D8 countries. But again, we have to see that the economy of these countries, regional countries, is very much linked with the political issues. Now, though, despite the fact that the D8 countries essentially was there to discuss economic issues, how to integrate regional economies, but the bigger question here was again the regional politics, the regional security situation. I think these political issues, these security issues in the region will keep on basically hitting hard the economies in the regional countries. No country at this particular point of time is in a position to take on the regional policeman, that is the apartheid state Israel. So the security issues would be there, would keep on lingering on in Lebanon. Same case would be there in Syria. So I think in months to come, I think unless these fundamental security issues are not tackled, unless the fundamental political issues are not tackled, I don't expect that there would be boom to the economy of the regional countries under the platform of the D8 countries.
Well, let's talk about the financial statements of the D8, because the D8 statements are about the finances and economy for most, with the combined population of over 1.1 billion and a collective GDP exceeding $4 trillion. How can the D8 effectively leverage its resources to tackle global economic challenges such as inflation, supply chain disruptions, and sanctions? And what key role are countries like Pakistan, Malaysia, and Nigeria playing?
I think they have the big chance to do something big. And the idea with which they can operate is obviously, I think, something they certainly would have discussed, and that is to basically actually have their trade in the local currencies, in their national currencies. And if that happens, I think that is going to bypass the US dollar. We have already heard President-elect Donald Trump that any country which dares to bypass dollar as the world's currency, we are going to hit them with the big tariff to their all kind of their exports. Now that is a bigger question, because of which my fear is that the D8 countries, despite the fact that it has a $4 to $5 trillion economy platform, and despite the fact that it has more than 1 billion population, but I think there would be an element of reluctance on the part of many countries to transact in their national currencies. Unless that doesn't happen, I think there would not be a meaningful change to integrate the economies in this part of the world. These countries have the potentials, but I think they do lack a political will, because of which I don't foresee that they would be able to basically improve their economy to the actual potential that they have.
Well, lastly, what would you say about the relationship with those countries? And do you think that the improvement of these kind of, do you believe that the improvement of these kind of relationships through the summits like this, when they are trying to improve and expand the relationships through adding members and uniting more and more and actually improving their relationships together with the conflicts resolving, like with the involved countries and such? So do you think that D8 in this particular reason is going to be important during the times that we are going through in the Middle East in such intense manner?
Well, I think a gathering of Muslim countries, their leaders gathering at this particular point of time, it has created a positive optics, and it has sent a message to the West. It has sent message to the apartheid state. But again, frankly speaking, I have to reiterate my point, and that is that in terms of security issues, the apartheid state simply doesn't listen to anyone. American under Donald Trump would certainly would not listen to anyone. There are big political issues which continues to linger on in the regions, despite the fact that this was essentially an economic forum. But their focus of their discussion in their side meetings and otherwise has largely shifted to the security issues in the region. This is a lingering problem, and it will keep on happening unless the major security and major political issues in the regions are not resolved. And by issuing long statements, by issuing a joint communique, believe me, this is not going to resolve the issues they are talking about. And the reasons are quite simple. When their bigger forum like OIC has not been able to do anything, then thinking that this platform would be able to do something, I think, let's be realistic, this is unlikely to happen until these political issues are resolved, which I don't see that they are going to be resolved in anytime soon in near future.
Thank you so much for joining us here on A News. Those were quite insightful.
The growing tide of anti-Israel sentiments. What you see behind me is just tip of the iceberg of what is happening in the country. More than half of $52 billion black CIA budget is spent on espionage network in Pakistan. How would you handle it?
The US has looked upon Pakistan as an ally at one point and then as an enemy at the same time.
That is going to be the first legal reason on the basis of which he is going to be instantly ousted by the Supreme Court of Pakistan.
Joining us live, Javed Rana, who's an expert on politics and geo-strategic issues.
In the world politics, which is not being driven by any moral principle, it is being driven by the hard geo-strategic realities. In a broader picture, more countries would aspire to have nuclear weapons.